So let's start by discussing our puzzle from last time. So what do you guys think? Yes.
You need to take 3 socks.
Why is that?
Because even if your first 2 draws draw opposing colors, one of those colors will be met by the 3rd draw.
Well, sounds good to me. Anybody have any problems with that?
Sounds good.
Yes.
Well, it's asking for the minimum, so wouldn't the minimum that you need to take would only be 2?
Well, you need the minimum that will guarantee that you have 2.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, you can get lucky, and if you pull 2, you get 2. But it doesn't guarantee that you'll get 2, right?
Yeah.
So, you gotta pay attention to the details. All right. So now let's look at a related puzzle, now that we have this under our belts. So, ready to go? All right. Well, if anyone still needs more time to think about this, you can think about it over the weekend. Okay. So first of all, I have this here to remind myself that I wanted to remind you about the FMA trip to New York that I sent you an announcement about last week, or thereabouts. So if any of you are interested in going, you should contact the FMA club officers and ask them if there's still any spots remaining. It's a pretty fun trip. You get to go to on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and talk to the guys who are market makers for the various securities. Get to go to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So it's basically, it's a fun educational trip. So if any of you are interested, you should sign up. And if you guys have any questions about it, feel free to let me know. Right? So raise your hand. Is anybody signed up yet? No. Okay. Well, maybe it's not too late. I don't know. All right. So last time we stopped at discussing examples of positive expected value games that you might encounter in real life. All right. So we were talking about extended warranties as an example of a negative expected value game that is fairly regularly offered to you. So one thing that you should realize is that avoiding taking a negative expected value game is equivalent to taking a positive expected value game, right? Because you're basically increasing the expected value of your assets by that difference that you just avoided decreasing by, right? So something to keep in mind in general, right? That because people tend to be risk averse and because they tend to take a narrow framing view of opportunities, they're generally very susceptible to these kinds of insurance offers that are really not a very good idea in the long term, right? So if you think that you have some kind of a piece of equipment, you get some extended warranty, you can be pretty sure that they're probably at least charging you at least double the expected loss that you might incur in whatever period. Unless you're planning specifically to get that extended warranty and like screw up your stuff, so you can claim it, which is like not good. In general, like in average use, they are charging you pretty hefty profit. So over time, as you buy thousands of pieces of equipment and offer an extended warranty on, you'll be passing by a lot of expected value if you buy extended warranties all the time. So assuming that there's a loss that you can swallow, you should think, okay, in the long term, I'll be better off even if I do lose a piece of equipment once in a while during the extended warranty period that I could have had, on average, I'll still come out way ahead, right? And so this is this is kind of the general idea. Now we'll also talk some more about insurance in general. I'm pretty sure there are a couple of chapters about insurance, and one item that we will discuss is the insurance deductible. Right? That is the amount of loss that is not covered by an insurance policy, right? That you have to basically pay out of your own pocket before it starts covering the rest of it, right? Now we'll discuss in more detail the idea of the distribution of the magnitude and the severity of losses and things like that, and how it all translates into insurance premiums. But again, the basic idea is very much the same, right? If you break up the distribution of losses into chunks, you can see that pretty much the relatively small losses you can probably afford to swallow once in a while, right? But of course, if you choose to have a lower deductible, you're paying insurance to cover those with relatively small losses. So, of course, you're going to be paying above the fair value of the expectation of a loss in that particular chunk. So, in a similar vein, you should usually take a larger deductible rather than a smaller deductible because the premium on that particular bit is going to be a negative expected value proposition, right? I mean, obviously, you don't want to take bear the entire risk if it's a big risk, because if you don't have enough resources to bear that loss, if it happens, you will not be very happy, right? For example, if you own one house and you're not like a gazillionaire and your house burns down and you have no insurance, you'll kind of really feel that event in your wallet, right? That you just lost like a house, which is generally one of your biggest assets, right? If you have one. On the other hand, let's imagine you are a gazillionaire and you own like 1,000 houses. Then you could say, okay, well, let's say fire insurance on a house is maybe $1,000 a year. So if I insure all of my houses against fire, I'll be paying $1 million a year for that insurance. Now let's imagine, let's think, what is the probability of any given house in a particular year, like burning down to a crisp? No, I don't know. I mean, if you were interested in looking that up, you might do the research and figure out what is generally the probability of a house burning down to a crisp, right? Maybe if you're doing a research project on home insurance, that's probably what you would be doing. And maybe you will find that, that probability is like, I don't know, 1/10% or 100% or whatever, that for any particular year, some house is going to burn down, right? So then what is the expected value of your loss? Let's imagine that your houses are worth about, $300,000 on average, right? So if you own 1,000 of them and there's 1/100% chance that one of them is going to burn down, then on average, one of your 1,000 houses is going to burn down every year, right? So you will lose $300,000 a year on average if you have no insurance on your houses. But how much will you lose if you do have insurance against fire on your houses? $1 million, right? Because you paid $1,000 premium for each of your 1,000 houses. So, right, again, if you can afford to bear the loss and you have the law of large numbers on your side, it makes financial sense not to have fire insurance on your house, right? Because you're going to be guaranteed to lose $1 million every year. But if you don't have insurance, then on average, you're expecting to lose much less than that, right? So it all depends on the sense of relative scale, right? You don't want to go bearing large losses that you cannot afford, or something that only happens relatively rarely, that the law of large numbers is not helping you out. But if it is, and if the losses are relatively small, your best bet is to go for the expected value, right? Because in the long run, you'll be better off. Even if in some periods you might experience the loss, on average you'll be better off. Right? Make sense? Any questions? Anyone have any other examples of a positive expected value game you might encounter in your life that you were supposed to think about since last class? Anybody a poker player here? Maybe. Right. So the whole idea of poker, right, is to make bets only when you're looking at a positive expected value, right? You don't want to, right? You don't want to make your wager when it's more likely that you lose it than that you will win, right? So in general, like the whole game is, you have to know what the probabilities are and what the different hands are, and have to keep track of what cards have been around, right? But if you do that, you can keep track of when it is a good idea to make, to make a wager, right? And so if you're good at picking out those opportunities where you have a positive expected value, right, then you can on average win. If you're playing against somebody who is better than you at it, then you will on average lose, right? So the whole idea that the game is training you to pick out positive expected value opportunities. And this is generally the case for like any games that you play, right? If you play any board games, you might probably have all heard about Monopoly and other games, right? In general, these are games that kind of train you to pick up the positive expected value proposition. Should I buy this property or this property? Should I sit and should I roll? Whatever the game mechanic is, in general, it is about, winning more resources over time. And you do that by taking the positive expected value proposition. Sometimes you'll get unlucky, right? But on average, you're going to do better, right? I mean, it doesn't even have to be monetary. You will say, okay, do I really want to go to the gym today? well, I don't want to spend an hour, I'm kind of lazy, whatever, and if I skip it today, nothing is going to happen, right? But in the long run, you know that if you just always sit in your ass and do nothing, you're not going to be very healthy for you, right? So even though in each individual case, you can think that maybe the cost outweighs the benefit in a particular case, because you have those feelings of wanting to sit around and do nothing. If you take a long-term, broad view of things, you know that you got to move around in some way or another, right? Whether you want to go to the gym or go somewhere else, whatever, you got to move around. So it doesn't have to be monetary, but in general, it's a good idea to take the broad frame view of things and put your decisions in the context of the long term, right? Same thing goes for studying for classes, maybe. And maybe doing readings for classes. Okay, any questions? Any other thoughts or suggestions? Yes.
Putting money into a retirement fund, because you could spend the money on something else that would help you in the short run, but in the long run, putting money into the retirement fund will help you more.
Right, so again, right, that's exactly a sort of a situation where the broad frame helps us make a good decision. Now, sometimes you have to spend money today, right? You gotta eat, you gotta have shelter, you gotta somehow get from your house to your place of work, if you happen to have one, right? But a lot of our spending is in fact discretionary, right? And as we'll actually talk later on today about, you don't want to end up with nothing at the end, right? Because that would really suck. We'll also talk about investment returns over time and things like that. And really, it is a good idea in the long term to regularly save some amount of your resources for the future, right? Anything else? Okay. Now let us discuss a little bit about your financial plans that you guys should have at some point in the past made, and that we haven't gotten to talk about until approximately now. So have you guys thought about sort of loosely? It doesn't have to be something particularly precise, especially the further in the future look. Have you guys thought about what kind of goals you would like to achieve in the sort of near to medium to long term? Raise your hand if you have some kind of a loose write-up of your financial plans. Okay. Raise your hand if you do not have some kind of. Okay. Who would like to share with us some of your near-term goals and plans? All right. So.
For my short-term plan, I said when I work this summer, save at least 1,000 of it towards a car for the weekend.
Okay. All right, that's a plan. Do you already have a car, or you're looking for?
I kind of have a car, but I share it with my mom sort of. So I'm saving money for my own car. So this summer I want to save another 1,000.
All right.
Cool.
Good plan. Anybody else? You got something?
All the money that I make on my job as a student worker over in the business dean's office, I put into my IRA.
Okay, very nice. A long range savings. I like that. Yeah.
My plan was similar to hers. This summer, with whatever extra money I have, like 3,000, I plan on selling the truck I have now
Okay. What's
It's a toy.
yeah. So your current car like does it work? Is there something?
No, I have a car and
Oh.
I have a truck, which is
Just
like
want
my
to
toy.
upgrade.
Yeah, and I want to just get the next thing. So that's my short thing.
All right. Anybody else? Yes.
I need a new laptop, so I'm saving up as much money as I can, and then I also applied for a credit card and business credit, so I'm hoping to pay half with cash and then for the rest on the credit card too.
Okay. Do you know approximately how much you were looking to spend?
Well, I want to buy a Mac, so I found a website that sells them for like $1,200. So I'm trying to save up about $400 or $500 in cash, and then put the rest on my credit card and just pay back the minimum each month.
We will talk some more about credit cards, but do you realize that you can buy a non-Mac laptop for about $500?
No, I know. I had one and I don't like it. I want a Mac.
It's
Okay.
ready to go.
Max on.
Is there? I'm willing to pay a little more money.
Okay.
My used
Anybody else?
Got a medium term. I plan on going to like pharmacy or med school, so like my medium term plan is to pay off my debt by 35 of med school.
Do you know how much those debts might turn out to be?
I've been looking like at a bunch of different schools, but like I don't know, I'm probably gonna do like 10,000 a year, so 40,000 like in total, and then so there's gonna be like interest and stuff. But
Okay, just it's a good idea to know approximately the magnitude of the things you're looking at, right?
yeah, I'm looking at a lot of different stuff.
All right. Anything else interesting that somebody wants to share with us? Or maybe not so interesting. It doesn't have to be interesting. You have anything in your?
Well, I have to apply for grad school this summer, and I have to find housing since I live 2 hours away. But I'm gonna go to grad school here.
Okay. And what's your what year of college are you in?
I'm a senior.
Okay. So you got so that's a near term plan for you.
Yeah, it's a short term.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Yes.
I want to start like within the next 2 to 5 years. I want to start a saving fund so I can begin paying back my college loan. And I think student loans because I plan on going to grad school. So
Okay. So how much are we talking about loans wise that you?
here.
Yeah. So far.
So far, well, I'm only a freshman, so it's actually only, I think it's less than 10,000.
All right. Anything else? Yeah.
For medium to longer term plans, through post college is saving towards a house.
Okay. Do you know how much you're looking to save for a house?
No idea. I'm not making any money towards it now, so there's no sense in putting up this astronomical figure and scaring myself off.
Well, I mean, you still need to know approximately what you need to work for, right? For example, if you say I want a house in this particular area, and the average housing price is like $200,000, and you need a 10% down payment, and then you need about $20,000 or something, right? So just ballpark. I mean, it's a good idea to have an idea. It doesn't have to be very precise, right? But for example, it might make a big difference if you need to stay like 10,000 versus 30,000. Right? You need to know what are we looking at roughly, right? So, but okay, let's. Yeah. You have something?
Just basically short to medium term, just start cashing bonds as they mature. I've got a couple U.S. bonds, and I was getting some Israeli bonds, which are mature now, and set up a savings account and maybe weigh the benefits of a stable stock as well.
Okay. So basically, you're going to cash them out and use them for investment purposes.
Exactly, yeah. Either put in savings or invest.
Okay, that's cool. Anybody else? Anything? Yes.
For a long-term goal, like that kind of being married sometime. I'm sure that's very expensive. So eventually, saving for that.
No, I mean, the actual process of getting married doesn't have to be expensive unless you want to make it expensive, right? Because at the end of the day, when you pay some registration fee, you sign some paper, you're done. Right? If you want to have a party, you can have a party. It doesn't have to be like a $50,000 party if you don't want it. Right? And $50,000 goes a long way towards like buying a house. So you can say, do I want to buy a house or do I want to have a big party? So it depends on what you want, but just the process of getting married doesn't have to. A lot of those expenses are pretty much discretionary as well. Right? So it's up to your preference of what you want to spend. There's nothing wrong with spending money in a discretionary manner as long as you realize that it's discretionary. Right? Anything else? You don't have a written plan, but do you have a plan? Anything that you're planning?
For short term, probably just to get a job in the summer, and then I always used to save up my money and spend up my money because I'm always buy all this stuff. Working very expensive. I always go out and buy food and go shopping, so I'll save half and spend the other half, but I would save it for college in the fall. Just because when I got here, I found that I was broke within 3 weeks, so that's what I did.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. All right. Anybody else want to share something interesting? Yes.
There's any books that I have to buy, not textbooks, but normal pleasure books. I'll get it at the thrift store on Delsey Drive because they have softcover books for 50 cents and hardcover for $1.
Sounds like a good deal.
They're much better than $15 to $20 for a book.
All right. Good stuff. I mean, if you don't have any particular specific books that you want to read, and you just want to read something interesting, maybe you're aware of Project Gutenberg. Right, so Project Gutenberg is a website that aggregates a lot of public domain materials. Right, guess at some point we'll maybe talk about the copyright law, but in general, things that have been published before approximately 1930s are out of copyright. They're public domain, and you can distribute them for free and not worry about anything. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of things printed before 1930, right? There's a lot of sort of classic works of literature all over the place. There are works of philosophy, works of fiction. It's fine if you say, I think I want to read this book, and then you can go and find it. But if you're just looking, what interesting things can I read, and I really don't know what's out there, you can actually go and get a bunch of free, good reading material, right? So you don't even have to pay anything for some of the discretionary reading that you want to do. And a lot of the stuff is actually good stuff. The people who were writing books in the old times generally, there was a higher barrier to entry into publishing. Right now, anybody can just scribble some stuff together and push it out to Amazon, and voila, you have a book, right? Back in the old days, the stuff that actually got published is stuff that people worked on for a long time. It was really serious, it was really useful and good, right? And so a lot, think about a lot of the sort of philosophy and natural philosophy works and all that stuff. And that was a lot of serious stuff went into that. So don't think that just because it is old, it is somehow bad or not, outdated or whatever. Now there's some stuff that may be outdated, but some stuff doesn't get old, right? And so if you Google, say, Project Gutenberg and look around, you can find a lot of you just go to their website and just browse what they have in their catalog, and there's a lot of stuff there. You can spend a lifetime reading this stuff and never run out. And just as an aside, it's when you're looking to get some stuff, the first thing you want to think about is, can I get it somewhere for free? Right? Because free stuff is awesome. No, I mean, there's it's just something to think about. Right? But yeah, the thrift store is a great idea also, especially if sometimes you just want an actual physical book for like running around with or whatever. Which is just all right. Anybody else? Okay. So have you guys read chapter 49, was it, or 51 from Edelman? And so what are some of the key lessons that we learned from that chapter? Yes?
Is basically how to get out of debt if you find yourself in debt.
Well, that was the title of the chapter, right? What are the actual things and techniques that we learned?
Well, I thought a really interesting one was if you have a card that has a certain rate, you get another card with maybe a lower rate, but with to pay off that one. So in the end, you'll owe the same amount, but it'll be a decreased rate, and you can pay it off faster.
All right. So that was indeed a very important technique and very important concept. Is that if you have obligations or debts, you want to pay off the one with the highest interest rate first. Right? If you can trade off an obligation that you have to pay at 10% interest on for an obligation that you have to pay 5% interest on, right away you just saved yourself 5% worth of interest that you have to pay somebody else, right? Now, for example, credit card debt usually has a fairly high interest rate. If you are actually carrying it from month to month, oftentimes you'll be paying 15, 18% interest on credit card debt, which really sucks, right? If you owe $100, then at the end of the year you'll owe $150. It's a lot of money, right? Whereas if you have $100 and you put it in your bank account, at the end of the year you'll have 100.05 or so, right? If you have a number of obligations with different interest rates, number one, what you want to do is try to convert the obligations with high interest rates into some other obligation with lower interest rate. So, for example, let's say you have a credit card which you are carrying a balance on and is currently charging you 18% interest, right? And for example, let's say you have $1,000 in it, and let's say you have and it has 80%, and let's say you have maybe another credit card and you also have $1,000 in it, and that one charges only 10%, right? Well, so one thing you could do, assuming you have enough of a credit card, you could use this card to pay off this one, and what you will end up with is you will end up with is $2,000 at 10% and nothing at 80%. You can see that's already a lot better, right? Because here, by the end of the year, you will be owing, 80% with that $1,180 on this card, right? Assume, just for simplicity, let's assume that you make annual payments, right? Because we don't want to deal with the monthly payments just yet, right? And here you will own 1,100. You will owe 1,100. So for a total of 2,280, right? Whereas in this situation, at 10%, you will owe 2,200. So you just saved $80 for free, just by nothing doing, because you paid off the higher interest loan with a lower interest loan, right? And that's actually a lot the basic idea of how loan consolidation programs work for people who are like in debt, like you have a bunch of different credit cards, they have high interest rate. How does it work? Well, maybe like if you have a house, you could take a home equity loan, and because the home equity loan is secured by your equity in your house, you can get a relatively low rate, right? Maybe like 5%. So let's say you have, $50,000 worth of credit card debt. It's not a place you really ever want to be in, right? And on average, maybe you're paying 15% interest rate on that $50,000. Well, if you take out a home equity loan for $50,000, maybe you'll be able to get that to $50,000 at 5%. So you take that loan, you use that $50,000 to pay off this $50,000, and now you just convert it from $50,015 to $50,005, right? So your annual amount of interest on the $50,000 is going to be what now? 5%. Okay, there you go. Right, so 1% of 50,000 is $500. So 5% is 5 times 500 is 2,500. Right? Everybody with us? Come on, you guys. Shouldn't the puzzle have been getting your mind working here? Okay, so now we owe $2,500 of interest per year. Whereas before, at 15%, how much did we get to we paying out in interest? 7,500 is 3 times as much, right? So there you go, you just save yourself $5,000 a year by consolidating your credit card debt into a home equity loan. Now, of course, the thing is, if you do that, and then you still continue accumulating new credit card debt, it's not really going to help, right? If you do that, you have to control your spending and try not to accumulate new debt and pay off the old debt, right? So, but still, right? This is an important idea, an important technique of making yourself better off is by reducing the interest rate that you pay on your obligations, right? Now, another and very related idea is that obligations and investments are two sides of exactly the same coin. Let's imagine, so for example, right now, if you look around, you might see that, the 30-year mortgage rates are about 3%. It's like something really low, right? We're in a historically low interest rate environment right now. So if you were to buy a house and you have good credit, right, you would get a 30-year loan for about 3%, maybe 3.5%, right? 3 to 3.5%, right? So then imagine that you own this house and you have this mortgage for 3%, right? And then you say, well, I'm making some extra money. Do I want to put this extra money into prepaying some of my mortgage debt to reduce the balance on my mortgage? And a lot of you might think, sounds like a good idea, right? You're reducing your debt load by paying off some of your mortgage earlier, right? Because that means you'll be able to pay it off sooner. But, and that's fine if you have nothing better to do with that money. But the thing is, you generally do have something better to do with that money, right? You could, in fact, maybe put it into an IRA in a diversified portfolio of equities, which historically, on average, has been returning about 8 to 10% per year, right? So if you put, let's say you have an extra $1,000. Say, where do I put it? Well, if you put it into your mortgage, you saved yourself 3% interest that you would have had to pay, right? But at the cost of foregoing an 8 to 10% return that you would have gotten on that $1,000, right? So do you guys see that it would actually make you better off to let that mortgage ride for as long as possible, as long as it has a relatively low interest rate, right? And instead use the extra money to invest and make even more money. right? Because the $1,000 that you leave in your mortgage is going to accrue interest charges of 3%, whereas the $1,000 that you put in your IRA portfolio would maybe accrue 8%. So you're netting free 5%, right? How bad can it be to net 5% for free, right? So again, the trade-off between higher interest and lower interest rate debt is the same as the trade-off between debt and investment, right? If you don't have to pay off the principal of the debt and it has a relatively low interest rate, then you could just use your money to invest in something better that gives you an even better rate, right? Now there are certain things you have to watch out for here. In particular, I mentioned an IRA because investment in your IRA is generally tax-free or tax-deferred, depending on the type of IRA. But at any rate, while the money is there, it grows tax-free, right? Now, if you invest something just in a regular investment account, you might, and if you trade in and out, you would have to pay tax every year on the profit that you make. So in that case, if you are making a 10% return a year, but it is a realized gain, then maybe you'll pay 1/3 of that in federal and state taxes. So you'll end up making only 6% net after tax. Still a lot better than 3% that you might get on your mortgage, but not as good as 10%. Now you have a little less cushion for the variations in returns. Right? So, do you understand the basic idea here? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So, just to give you an example, I do have some student loan debt from my grad school days. That has been consolidated at like 2.6% fixed interest rate. So in effect, this is like free money, right? 2.6% is about as cheap as you can get somebody else's money, right? So I'm in no hurry to be paying off my student loan debt because there are better things I could be doing with my money, right? So I could be giving them a lot of money and paying it off really fast, but there is no reason to do that if I could put my money and make a higher return than the 2.6% savings I could be getting, right? So I mean, if it comes, remember the loan isn't callable, right? The guys who loan the money can't just say, oh, by the way, we kind of want you to repay it right now, right? At a fixed term, and there is a fixed repayment schedule, and this is the payment that they want for so many years. That's what I'm going to give them, and not a penny more, right? The rest of my money, I have better things to do with. I can get a better return on that money. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. Let me talk about this other bit, and then we'll come back. So I want to talk to you about some basic ideas of utility theory, right? We have already touched on that at some point earlier in the semester, and I recall, I remember drawing a graph of the utility curve. So some of these ideas are really pretty intuitive. Right? The basic idea is this: if you are like destitute, if you're really poor, right? Then $100 means a lot, right? You can do a lot with $100. You can like eat for a month on $100, right? Unless you like go out every day, right? So $100 is a lot of money. Now imagine if you were like, if you were a millionaire, or even if you're not a millionaire, maybe you're making like $50,000 a year. In that case, $100 is pretty cool, but it's not really as important to you, right? So the utility that you get out of $100 when you have very little is a lot more than the utility you get when you already have a lot. Right? Make sense? Does everybody have any questions? Is this a straightforward idea? Alright, so I mean, what do we mean by utility? Right? What is this concept of utility?
Happiness, like the amount of happiness that you get from a certain amount of money or something.
And so, roughly speaking, yes, it is basically the amount of happiness, the amount of usefulness, how much better off you are as a result of that $100, right? So it's kind of a subjective measurement of how much extra usefulness you get out of some amount of money, right? So if we draw roughly the shape of the curve between the amount of wealth that you have and the utility that you derive from each dollar of your wealth, it's going to be some kind of a concave shape, right? Because you get a lot of utility out of the first $100, right? And you go from 0 to 100, and you're like, oh, gee, I got $100, right? And then, the second $100 is still pretty awesome, right? And the third $100 is probably also pretty awesome, right? But eventually, when you get over here, and I don't know, $500,000, right? When you have $500,000, the extra utility you get from going from 499, 900, 500,000, right? So here is, here is 499, 900, here is 500,000, and there is your utility. You get a very, very small, very small number of utility when you go from $100, right? It's like an extra $100. Yeah, I'll take it, but it doesn't make a break, right? And so, the curve sort of looks kind of like that. So this is sort of canonically the shape of sort of a utility function, right? Because you get more utility from the marginal extra dollar, the less you have. And the more you have, the less useful an extra dollar is to you as far as the happiness and utility you get out of it. Right? Makes sense? Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about what arises out of this concept, right? So let's imagine that we have some kind of a proposition in front of us that is risky, right? So just imagine that we're looking at a coin toss game that is basically a 1-to-1. You win 100 if you get tails, and you lose 100 if you get heads, or something like that, right? So let's see how that maps onto this utility function, right? So let's imagine, that our wealth is at some point over here, right? Wealth 1. So we're looking at this proposition, and what we're saying by considering the options is, okay, if I lose $100, I'm going to have slightly less wealth, right? Something, right? And if I win $100, my wealth is over here. That would be wealth plus 1. And so we're saying, okay, if I look at it in terms of dollar amounts, right, the expected value is 0, right? The 50-50 chance of winning 100, lose 100. But if we look at it in terms of the utility of my wealth that I will have in both situations, right? What we have is that the utility of this wealth is here, the utility of that wealth is here, right? Let me change the curvature so I can actually demonstrate a little bit better, right? What I'll do is I'll just zoom in on this wealth differential. So let's say that wealth plus 1 is going to be over here, and wealth minus 1 is going to be over here, right? Just because otherwise, so there's our utility, if we win, right? So we can ask ourselves, what is the expected value of our change of wealth if we play the game, and that is 0, right? Plus 100 minus 100. But what is the expected value of the two utilities that we will have in two situations? Right? Well, 50 with a 50% chance, we'll have this much utility, and with a 50% chance, we'll have this much utility. Right? So what is the expected amount of utility that we will have by playing this game? Right? Well, this is, the expected value is, 50% one and 50% another. So it's a linear combination of these two utilities. So in fact, our expected utility is going to be here, right? In the middle being these 2 points on this straight line, right? Because this is, the expected value is a linear, linear combination of the two utilities, right? And you can convince yourself by making up some numbers that this is in fact what is going to occur. So what is important to notice here is that even though the expected value of our coin toss game proposition, in this case, is 0, our expected utility from playing this game is actually less than if we didn't play it. Right? Because if we didn't play it, we have this wealth, and we have this much utility. But if we take on this proposition, then our expected value of utility that we get is going to be less than where we are. So of course, somebody who has this concave shape of a utility function is not going to take on this proposition. Right? So then we might ask, how can we sweeten the pot in order to encourage this person to take on this game, right? Or maybe we can ask, how much must we pay this person in order to convince him to take this game? Or we can ask, how much is he willing to pay us to avoid taking this game? All of these are equivalent questions. They're asking, what is the difference between playing the game and not playing the game in terms of the utility, right? And so you can see that, in order for him to play the game, he must be at the utility, he must think that he will end up at a higher expected utility than he is right now. Right? So right now, he's right here. So how can we sweeten the pot? We know that maybe he will, in order to be different, he has to be somewhere here on this line, or higher. So maybe we'll say, instead of a 50-50 chance, we'll say you have a 60% chance of winning 100 and a 40% chance of losing 100. Right? In which case, we still have a linear combination, and we're going to move towards the win in the draft because we have a higher weight on the winning, 60%. Right? And if we change the probabilities sufficiently enough that we move the expected utility up above this level, then the game becomes attractive. Right? Make sense? Does anyone have any questions? And so this is, this is the sort of the canonical normative theory of expected utility that tells us how people should make decisions about risky propositions. Now, this is not actually how many people do make decisions about risky propositions, but I don't really want to get into prospect theory, which is sort of the descriptive theory right now, right? But so this is kind of the basic idea. The point, now the reason I introduced this is I want to talk to you about the idea of consumption smoothing, right? So think about it. It's pretty nice to be able to eat, a nice hearty meal like every day, right? But the time, and so you might say, okay, so what is the value, the utility to me of eating, good hearty meals every day for the next month? And so you say, okay, well, the utility of each individual day is such and such, and so the total utility is going to be 30 times the daily utility of getting a meal, right? But the problem is that, this sounds just fine, right? Makes sense. Getting 30 meals for a month is kind of pretty good. It's about 30 times as good as getting one, right? So we can sort of buy that. But the problem is that in that case, we could say, well, right, what if I offer you, 10 meals a day for 3 days, and then nothing for the other 27? Doesn't sound so good, right? Because, not eating for 27 days is kind of right? So even though if you look at just the simple sum of utilities of everything, right? We'd say, all right, so we're still getting a total of 30 meals for over the 30 days. So it seems like the utility of those 30 meals will be the same. But of course it isn't, right? Because we do not have this sort of, it isn't, because not eating for 27 days is really hard, right? It doesn't feel very good. We are generally happier when we have a smooth rate of consumption, right? Rather than it like peaking up and down. Right? And of course, the reason is that if you think about it, getting one meal in a day is subject to this utility function, right? Going from 0 meals to 1 meal, pretty awesome, right? But think about it, like, if no meal and somebody said, hey, here's an awesome meal, and you're like, yes, right? Now, going from 1 meal to 2 meals a day, still pretty good, right? Pretty good, like, you can have like one really big meal, like by the end of the day, like you'll be hungry again, right? And so, so going from 0 meals to like 1 meal, you're like, yay, awesome utility, right? Going from 1 meal to 2 meals, maybe, right here, that's awesome, pretty good, much better than 1. Then going from 2 to 3, and maybe you're here, slightly better than 2, but it's not, doesn't really make that much of a difference, right? But if you go out to like 10 meals, it's like, you will have trouble eating the 10 meals in one day, right? Right? So it's not going to be like all those extra meals are not going to give you a whole lot of utility. Right? So if you can spread these meals out over the 10 days, right, then every day you will get a bunch of utility from each of the meals. Right? And so that means that your total utility over the 30 days, if you get a meal a day, is much higher than your total utility if you just bunch all the meals together. Right? Because then the marginal utility from each individual one starts becoming smaller and smaller really fast. Right? Makes sense? Now the same thing applies to our use of money throughout our life. Right? So imagine, if you spend like $1,000 in a day, and then you have no money to spend in the rest of the month. Pretty shitty, right? Right, it's like one day, like you spend a lot of money, and like it's really nice, like you spend it's fine, but then but for the rest of the month you don't have enough money, and it's really bad. So the same thing applies, right? So each day, right, you can get a certain amount of utility from $1, right? So, but if you can spend $500 a month, $500 in a day, you get a lot of utility out of it, right? From the next $500 in the same day, you don't get as much. And from the next $500, you get not, you get even less still, right? So, so the sum of the usefulness of our use of money is not just the sum of the money that we use. That is the key point, right? The key point is that we derive a lot more utility from a smooth consumption over time. Because every day, we get a big bump of utility from the first little bit of consumption or whatever it is, right? Whether it be food or money spending or whatever, right? But later on, from every extra marginal dollar or every extra marginal calorie, right? Or whatever it is, we get less and less and less. Right? So this is the basic idea that we can think about when we think about saving for retirement, right? Because hey, long time in the future, like who cares? Nobody knows what's going to happen even. So why don't I just use all my resources right now and worry about the future, like later, right? But the thing is, if you know that if you have to basically become destitute when you're done because you have no money remaining at some later point, you'll be very unhappy. right? Because here you are, you'll be right, you'll be right here until the bottom with very little resources to spend. All right, so let's imagine that we can draw a little utility curve for every say year of our lives. All right, so you can think, let's say we anticipate living here for 100 years, roughly speaking, right? So for every year of our lives, we have like a little utility curve of how much, how much income we can spend, or how much money we can spend during that year, right? And so on and so forth, right? And until we get to the end, we get some more of the utility curve. All right, so we can say, okay, I can, every day is kind of like that, right? And so, one question I'm asking you is, let's imagine that throughout your entire lifetime, you will be able to spend, say, let's call it $10 million. And so my question to you is this: how can you allocate those $10 million among your 100 years of life in order to achieve the greatest possible total utility in your lifetime out of these $10 million? Yes. Right, so as it happens, right, you get the greatest utility by equally allocating the money among each of the years. Right? That because right, so let's have one easy proof by contradiction is to say, okay, let's imagine we have spread them equally throughout each year, right? So in each year, we're somewhere, at some point where we're spending $100,000, right? So if it is not the case that spreading them equally is the best possible allocation, it should be possible to take $1 from one of the years and transfer it into another year and get a better outcome, right? So let's see, let's imagine that we take $1 from this year and we transfer it to any of the other years. All right, so in this year we're going to lose some bit of utility, right? It will be utility of 100,000 minus utility of 99.999, right? Whatever that happens to be. And on the other year, whichever year we transfer it to, we'll have utility of 100,001 minus the utility of 100,000. Right? Is this clear? Are we following what we're doing? Now, since we know that the utility curve is concave, right, namely that the slope is decreasing with every step along the horizontal axis, we know that this step is going to be larger than this step, right? So that means that if we want to just sum the total utility we got over the years, we have just reduced the sum of our utility by sort of reallocating this $1 from the exactly equal allocation to a different allocation. Right? Makes sense? Right, so I mean, this is this is kind of a very simplified model, just to give you an idea of why it is, and all this is of why we really look to have a smooth rate of consumption that we can achieve, right? Because things go up and down. In the good times we're feeling good, but in the bad times we're feeling really bad, right? So you want to smooth out those bad times because bad times are really bad, right? So, I mean, now obviously each year of your life, your utility curve is not actually exactly the same. In certain stages of your life, maybe you have higher expenses, right? Maybe you are raising children, and raising children is really expensive, right? Or maybe you are, going to school, and like paying for school is expensive, right? Or something like that, right? So there are variations, but the basic idea that, sort of the extra residual money that is left over after expenses that you must spend, right? You can think of the utility curve as the utility of sort of disposable income, right? The income that remains after you spend what you must spend, right? and you want it to be relatively smooth, right? You don't want to be without money in some cases, and in exchange have a lot more in the others, right? So that's so that's the idea of this whole the whole process of like making financial plans and figuring out how you're going to allocate your resources, right? Because life is essentially like a resource allocation game, right? And you want to produce the highest possible total utility in your life as a result of allocating some finite amount of resources. Now, we all will get different amount of resources over our lifetimes, depending on the kind of jobs we get and how lucky we happen to be, and all that other stuff, right? But in general, whatever you get is what you get, right? And so you want to allocate whatever it is that you get in such a way as to get the greatest possible utility out of it, right? So that's so that's our goal. You do a quick time check. All right. So. Another thing that I want to mention as relating to our reading is the idea of, I guess it would have, I would say, the idea of how taxation affects the differential between getting more money and saving more money. All right, so for every dollar of money that you happen to have, that you save, that you basically do not consume that day, how many more dollars do you have remaining? For tomorrow.
One more that you didn't spend.
One, all right? For every dollar you save, you end up with one extra dollar, right? Now, how about this? How many dollars do you have for every extra dollar that you make? How do you earn? That is actually not the case. And the reason that is not the case is because of taxes. Right? So if you think, that the average person is somewhere in the range of about 33% total marginal tax rate. I mean, we'll talk more about the details of the taxation system when we discuss Chapter 3 in Gitman, right? But the basic idea is that there is a certain tax rate. And in this country, at this point, you can sort of count on the marginal dollar being taxed at about a 1/3 tax rate. I mean, it varies based on what you're totally from it, right? So if it is 1/3, for every extra dollar you make, how many extra dollars do you actually have? 66 cents or thereabouts, right? So what it tells us is that it is a lot more efficient, or it is a lot more effective to save a dollar than it is to earn a dollar. Now, obviously, you have to earn dollars somewhere, right? You have to start from somewhere. But given a certain level of income that you have, you'll be a lot better off tomorrow if you save some dollars today than if you earn the same number of extra dollars, right? By approximately this amount of the marginal federal and state and local tax level, right? So, think about that. Whenever you are, whenever you are confronting some kind of a discretionary spending situation, you think, do I really want to save that dollar? Think, how many new dollars must I earn in order to have that extra dollar tomorrow? Right? And it will have to be more than the dollar because it will be taxed if you earn just $1, right? So if you imagine that your tax rate is 33%, right? You're saying, okay, so I earn, right? So I earn some amount, but I'm going to be taxed at 33%, let's say, right? So that means that what will remain is 67%, and I want that to be equal to $1. Right? So what is this amount that you must earn in order to get the marginal extra dollar of spending money? One over right? Right, so you must earn an extra, right? Everybody can see that? $1.50, right? So that means that our x is 1 over 0.67, and since we assume this is just rounded to 2/3, right? We're going to be 3 out. Right? So that means that for every, so if you spend an extra $1 and then you say, I'll make it up tomorrow, right? By earning some more money. Well, you have to earn $1.5 in order to get an extra $1. Whereas when you're saving money, you guys have to save $1 in order to get an extra $1. So it is a lot more efficient and a lot more effective to save money in order to increase your future discretionary cash flow than it is to earn new money. So keep that in mind. We will continue discussing. So next time we will discuss your financial statements from Chapter 2 of Gitman, right? And we'll possibly get into some basics of taxation on which is from Chapter 3. So I'd like you to read Chapter 3 as well, just so we're